Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner Podcast,
a podcast where we dig into the fascinating issues, conditions, and quandaries in the massage and manual therapy world today.
I'm Whitney Lowe.
And I'm Til Luca.
Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner.
Hi, this is Til Luca. This summer, I'll be offering my ankle issues course via live stream. This will be the first time this course, which is the latest in my advanced myofascial technique series, will be available remotely or by recording. You can join us live. You can even bring a client and work on it there with us in real time if you want CAMT credit or certification credit, or the course is affordable enough that you can just sign up and watch the recording later at your leisure. All those options will earn you NCB credit. And for a limited time, Thinking Practitioner listeners like you can save an extra 15% with the coupon TTP at checkout. If you go to advanced-trainings.com and sign up for the ankle live stream, you'll see all those options there. The Thinking Practitioner podcast is supported by ABMP, Associated Bodywork and Massage Professionals. ABMP membership gives professional practitioners like you a package, including individual liability insurance, free continuing education and quick reference apps, online scheduling and payments with Pocket Suite, and much more.
And ABMP's CE courses, podcast, and Massage and Bodywork magazine always feature expert voices and new perspectives in the field, including from Til and myself and from our guests today. Thinking Practitioner listeners can save on joining ABMP at abmp.com/thinking. And Til, who are our mystery guests with us here today?
Our guests today, Rachelle, Clauson, Nicole, Trombley, welcome. Thanks for having made the time to come be with us. You are from San Diego. You're both massage therapists, authors, and the co-directors of AnatomySCAPES, which is pretty cool. We're going to hear more about that later. And you also write, like Whitney mentioned, for Massage and Bodywork magazine, where you co-author the Anatomy for Touch column. Welcome. What else would you like our listeners to know about you? Maybe Nicole, could you start?
Yeah, well, Rachelle and I work together in the dissection space when we're not at the massage table. And I have a background and training in biology and biochemistry. So I love bringing that micromolecular world to my hands-on work as I'm, obsessively massaging and thinking molecularly, but also to our work and teaching in the dissection space. That's one of my passions.
That's so great. How about you, Rachelle? What else would you like people to know about you or your background?
Also, it means a great start. This is very current with where we are in the world right now, of kind of moving from the part of 20 years or more doing massage and studying the body, studying anatomy. I've kind of got a mixed background before I started doing massage, doing things that were with the body in other ways. I was a dancer. I did a lot of ballet. I started studying anatomy actually as a ballet dancer and non-professionally. And then I continued to study theater and mime. So I have a lot of movement background that informs a lot, I think, of how I work with the body and how I think about the body, probably how I move when I'm doing massage as well, bringing that kind of movement. So beauty and anatomy have always been very interlaced for me. And I know we'll talk about probably a little bit later as well as that project that I worked with, where that was a very key part, which was bringing the Plastination Project into being. And that was an amazing thing about the almost visual arts overlapping anatomy and the body work and movement world. So.
Well, that's where I first made your acquaintance. That's what caught my eye, as it were, your involvement in the Fascial Plastination Project. So I do want to talk about that. And I just want to underline what you said about your interest in the beauty aspect of what we're doing as well as the technical and anatomical pieces there. But if we could, let's start with your recent article in Massage and Bodywork, which we were focusing on the retinaculum. It fit perfectly with our ankle theme that Whitney and I are doing this around now. But could you tell our listeners something about what the retinaculum is and why it might be significant for us as hands-on therapists to learn about it?
Yeah, absolutely. We both wrote the article together. We always co-author our articles. One of us takes kind of lead, but Nicole does a lot of the research and we do a lot of the discussing and writing together. And one of the things that, besides it being a very fascinating piece of fascia that has quite a bit of research coming out on it, I think from a touch perspective, I found it an interesting thought that sometimes we gloss over certain parts of the body that aren't so muscle oriented. And typically retinacula is found in parts of the body that aren't so juicy, that aren't so squeezy, that aren't so like thinking about working out the muscle system and being at the joints of the wrist and of the ankles. And based on research and what we know and what we're learning about retinacula right now, which is pretty phenomenal stuff, knowing that our touch to those areas can have influence, and it sometimes might be actually critically important for restoring good function, especially post-injury. Yeah. So
Okay, so for our listeners who don't know, the retinacula is what? What's it made out of? What's it's found at our wrists and shoulders in these non-juicy places. What's it made out of?
Yeah, I mean,
what is it?
Yeah, it's part of the deep fascia system, and yeah, we have them at our ankles, our wrists, usually around joints. So there's retinacula at the elbow, at the knees. These are some of the more famous ones. And to look at the ankle, there's more than one retinacula. There's multiple retinacula over the extensors, multiple over them, and so it's there's lots of retinacula, and one of the best ways to describe them, from at least from the fascial perspective, is they're reinforcements of the deep fascia. So that deep fascia, the myofascia, the fascia that is part of the musculoskeletal system that's working with that.
Yeah.
And then with that, we start looking at it as part of the proprioceptive system, right?
Yeah, and maybe just to give it even a bigger overview, I'm big on overviews. I think that a lot of times we can talk detail about structures, fabrics in the body, but we zoom in on them. And so then it's like, well, how does that fit with the whole story? And you don't necessarily know where to hang these pieces of information if you haven't seen the bigger, broader picture. And fascia, obviously, your listeners, I think, probably would have quite a bit of understanding of fascia. But I think it's really important just to make a distinction here, even about within the fascial system, how many different types of fascia appear. And something as diverse as the let's say the dermis of the skin is a part of the connective tissue system that's connected on through with the fatty layer, which is the adipose tissue that has a collagen component. Carry that on down through to a membrane within the fatty layer of the superficial fascia. Carry that on down deeper into the skin ligaments and retinacula cutis that connect even further through the deep adipose tissue. And then you come to finally the deep fascia. And the deep fascia goes even further. So it depends on where you are on the body as to whether you're coming to, at what kind of deep fascia you're coming to. So on the trunk, different from on the limbs. And the limbs we like to describe sometimes as having these sleeves or stockings of fascia. So if you can imagine putting on a shirt or maybe even a bodysuit or wetsuit, that you have these sleeves that your arms go through. Underneath the fatty tissue, you actually have a sleeve of deep fascia. So that, to me, is not discussed nearly as often as maybe what would people think about the sausage wrapping, right? You talk about having like every muscle has its own enveloping fascia. That is true, but that is a muscular fascia that singularly envelops one muscle at a time. What we're talking about is an aponeurotic deep fascia, which envelops more than one muscle. And in the case of the limbs, it envelops the entire limb. So the whole arm has a sleeve and the whole leg has a sleeve. But of course, it's not only that simple, right? It goes more complex than that. We'll probably talk about that more in a minute, about compartments and how these divisions then that they actually dive into the bone and connect this three-dimensional pocket-filled structural organization to the entire system of the whole body, right? So the muscles live and interact with that fascial system in really specific ways. So when we're talking about the retinacula, so giving that frame, we're talking about a thickening, a reinforcement in that more sleeve or stocking. And so that's the part that would be on the limbs. So we're talking deep fascia on the body, on the trunk, it's gonna be different, right? The hubs of deep fascia are more in the low back and in the abdomen. And then once you get through the fatty layer, you kind of are right to the epimysium and a lot of the muscles, whereas that's not the case when you are on the limbs. So when we think about, I'm just going to just one more point and throw it back to Nicole, but this idea of fascia as a system, systems have organs, right? And so if you think of the entire fascial body as a system, Carlos Stecco has suggested that we could recognize the retinacula as an organ within the fascial system with a very specific job to do. Ta-da!
So,
and that job would be, yes, next question.
I was to say, I wanted to hear some more about the jaw, because my perspective about the retinacula has always leaned a lot on its biomechanical function as sort of a pulley system, because we talk about them being at the distal extremities, the ankles and the wrists especially. So yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what your ideas are on the job there.
Well, that's, one of the reasons we wrote this article is because it's a piece, the retinacula are a piece of anatomy that there's a little bit of a story behind. And the story that we all learn, particularly I think in massage school anatomy, is one way, and that the wrists and the ankles, we've got bracelets and strappy sandals of retinacula. But when we go into the dissection lab, the work that we've done at least in the dissection lab, and when we bring massage therapists into the dissection lab, what we actually see on the limbs is the retinacula are recognizable. It's like, yeah, that's okay, that's the retinacula. But it's not exactly the same story that we learned when we learned the retinacula. So the original story is a biomechanical story. It's exactly that. It's and the story goes back even Vesalius, who is that great Flemish anatomist who kind of upended the history of anatomy and sort of changed the way anatomy was talked about back in the 1500s. I mean, he started drawing and writing about the retinacula as a biomechanical structure and as a distinct and separate structure. And so that the retinacula were drawn as bracelets. They were drawn as the straps on your gladiator style sandals, right? But when we go into the lab, even though we can see them and we can see it's like, you see the sleeve of our camera's mirrored here. You see the sleeve, and you can see this white concentration at the wrist, for example. It's completely continuous with the sleeve. If you tried to pick up that bracelet, the entire sleeve is going to tent and pull with it. You could pull the whole arm with it. It's completely continuous. And so it's not a separate structure. And so when we started seeing this, I'm like, hey, wait a minute. That's not the way bracelets work. That's not exactly what we were expecting to see. Started doing a lot more of this research into, well, what is the story? What is the story here? And that's when we started really getting into. Carlos Stecco's done most of the work on it.
A lot of research on it for a long time. It's not even new research. I mean, we're talking like 20 years ago that really she started studying this, and it was already in the research preceding that at some level.
Yeah. And when you start looking through her research, she signals people well before her in 1980s into the 1970s who actually who kind of commented, the retinacula, they don't really look like they're up to the job. They're flexible. They're
could they really strap it down if that was really what they were doing?
Is that really what they're up to? And they were finding innervation. They found that these structures had free nerve endings as well as Pacini's and Ruffini's in them. And so they were nervated. And so it didn't quite add up. Nothing really went that far with that research.
Can you tell our listeners about Puccini's and Ruffini's? And you're saying basically maybe they're not just pulleys. In fact, maybe they're not up to their job, but we're finding these funny things in this. What are those things again?
So they found nerves, they found free nerve endings, but then they found these encapsulated nerves, which serve as mechanoreceptors. So Pacini's, which are nerve endings with a connective tissue capsule around them that can actually perceive pressure. Ruffini's perceive stretch. There's these informations around the nerve endings, and that these are nerve organs that are important we find in proprioception.
And they're completely continuous with the fascia. So I think this concept of continuity is the thing to really highlight here. The idea that they are not just straps and sandals, but they're a continuity of these sleeves and stockings. Let's give them names. So on your upper limb, you've got the brachial fascia is from like shoulder to elbow, and from elbow to hand, you have the antebrachial fascia. And that's a continuous fascia with different, anchor points throughout it, but it's still a continuous thing with different names based on region. Same thing in the legs, you have a continuous fascia that's of the entire lower limb, but on the thigh, it's called the fascia lata. And on the lower, below the knee, it's called the crural fascia or the fascia cruis. And these retinacula live in those sleeves. So it's continuous with, so you're not going to have if you have a pull on one, you have a pull on both. And the containment is by all. It's not just the containment of this reinforced area, but the entire thing is actually providing containment at a level, stronger containment where there's reinforcement, where the collagen is more dense, where there is a strengthening of the fascia in this specialized area. And these specializations of deep fascia, otherwise possibly considered an organ of the fascial system, would be what the retinacula are. And then the second piece, this idea that, think about when you're talking about Vesalius, they weren't studying the microscopic view. There wasn't a way to be able to perceive that it did anything other than a biomechanical function because we weren't into the neurology of things at that time. And so once the microscopic, not just the macroscopic big view, but the little view of the microscopic view, and starting to study innervation, starting to see, like, first of all, the idea that fascia was innervated at all as a system was a new thing. No one knew that until they started looking for it. And then now we have researchers that are looking really specifically. And so Carla's work, to see, what is this concept of the fascia as serving as a proprioceptive role. She has this really great presentation. I encourage anybody listening to this to go find it. If you just go to YouTube and search Carla Stecco, it's one of the first ones that will even show up. And it's from a symposium where she presented in 2014 at something called the lecture Sport Physio. So I'm assuming that's physiotherapist.
We can link to that in the show notes for sure. Yeah.
Sure. So her presentation was called Fascia Research and Proprioception Implications in Sports. And the key points that she made in this lecture, I've gone back to literally over and over and over again for years now, because it's so dense. It's a 20-minute presentation, but there's so much about the proprioceptive role of fascia in the lecture. And basically, to summarize, she basically suggests that if fascia is serving a proprioceptive role in the body, then it has to be able to have certain features. And she lists 4 specific features that it must have. Number 1, it has to be innervated. If the fascial system is not innervated, then it's not a part of the proprioceptive system. It has to have nerve endings that end in that system to be recording, receiving data and information, and connecting with the rest of the nervous system. Number 2, it has to be able to perceive the contraction of the underlying muscles. And this is where my sleeve and stocking analogy completely breaks down, because a sleeve is obviously something that you can slide on and slide off, and same thing with the stocking. Whereas the fascial system is not quite that simple, but it's a good place to start if people don't know anything about fascia. But then, like anything, once you have your basics, you got to go deeper. And when going deeper, what's very clear is that many of the muscles, if not all of the muscles, have a connection to the fascial system as a larger system, right, of communication. It's embedded.
You're talking about a mechanical connection, you're saying?
Yes, a mechanical connection. And those can show up in different ways on different parts of the body. Sometimes the fibers of the muscle, like in a pinnate muscle, actually fan out. If you think of like I like to think of a quill, from those pens that they signed the Constitution with, and you've got the point of the quill of the feather of the ostrich, and that's the tendon end, and then the muscles coming off like feathers going in both directions. Well, the edges of those feathers don't converge again to the other end of the quill. They actually reach to the outer edges of the brachial fascia or antebrachial fascia in the forearm. You've got the extensor carpi radialis or ulnaris, and the flexor carpi ulnaris are very good examples of this. If you cut that muscle open, you can see how they don't go to the end tendon. They actually embed in the fascial bag of the antebrachial fascia. So they're tensioning and stretching the fascia with contraction. And no matter how it shows up, this is the same everywhere. On the upper body, you've got the fibers of the deltoid muscle that actually their epimysium, their endomysium, their perimysium are continuous and actually form the brachial fascia. So when the deltoid is contracting, it's going to the bone with its tendon, the part we all know, but it's also contracting the fascial bag. So this outer fascia is being contracted in different regions by different muscles. So in the arm, there's multiple muscles that all embed into this bag, including the deltoid for the lateral aspect, the latissimus dorsi for the posterior aspect, pectoralis for the anterior aspect, and the medial aspect actually comes from the fascial connections that come both from the pectoralis and the latissimus, where they converge to the medial arm. So all throughout the body, these sleeves are interwoven with the actual fibers, which means that the fascia can perceive the contraction by being stretched with the muscle. So then briefly, points 3 and 4 was the specific, it has to always have a specific organization that is consistent across all bodies and not just an anatomical variation. So these specific organizations can't just be on me, but not on you if they have to do with proprioception. And in the past, they were noted. There's literature and textbooks that actually recognize them, but they were recognized as anatomical variations or anomalies, or they were seen as innervation or insertions or origins, but not seen as important, probably because at that time not understanding the innervation part. And then the last part is about being able to transmit forces over a distance. Like, is the fascial continuity, is the structure of fascia, is the fabric of fascia have enough stiffness to it that if I pull on one end, it actually can translate that force further down the road? Because if it's really adaptable and stretchy, then the muscle can contract and pull on the fascia, and it doesn't translate that force anywhere. Then this is what really challenges this idea of the fascial web, a word that's used a lot and not incorrectly, but maybe it gives us the wrong visual in our minds of being just this amorphous, highly adaptable, can make it into any shape. If it's very webby and soft and flexible and stretchy, then it can't have a part in the proprioceptive story. It has to have levels of resistance in different areas in order to do that, which brings us back to the retinacula, right? Which has these like thickenings and this stiffness in it, that the muscular force and the muscular tension and that biomechanical element is communicating. It is communicating to the retinacula in those ways. So that was the short version of those 4 points. We could go into any of them with quite a bit more depth, but it's a great place to start to think about fascia as a proprioceptive organ and proprioceptive system. Yeah, communicates within that.
Why does this matter to hands-on therapists? Why does it matter that fascia be proprioceptive in addition to some mechanical effect? Why is that an important concept?
There's several ways to go about answering that question. Where would you like to start?
I'll let you start with that one though.
Well, I think, so taking beyond the retinaculum and retinacula, then just like in general, like that the fascial system communicates, is that what you mean?
Why, as a hands-on therapist, why would this be interesting to me? It's totally interesting to me as an anatomy geek.
Mhm.
Yeah, but how do I put this into practice? How does this going to inform what I actually am doing and thinking about and experiencing on the table?
Well, I think because if you think about the fact that you have now, what you now know is that this whole fascial system is a communicating system, then what problems start to arise if there's something going on in that fascial system that's interrupting communication. And that's where we'll see reduction, we'll see pain, dysfunction, or a lack of coordination and a lack of proprioception. So people that, I mean, we were talking about the ankle sprains in particular, that ankle sprains and the concept of instability. Oh, I really have to stabilize my ankles. They need to be stiff and stable in order to not roll my ankle. I mean, you probably talk about this part, like really recognizing there was some studies that were done about the instability of the ankle, perhaps having a lot more to do with a lack of proprioception due to injury to the organs that are responsible for that. And there were like 4 different things that were seen in this particular study that were seen as consistent with where there was no ligament damage, but it was from a collection of people who had repeated ankle injuries, ankle sprains, when they took a look with MRI, I believe, to see what was going on with the retinacula in those areas.
Yeah, there was an MRI study. This is actually one of Carlos Deco's studies where they looked at 17 healthy volunteers who volunteered, but they had a history of ankle sprain. I think they had to qualify with like at least several months of ankle instability. And they used MRI to analyze the retinacula. Were there alterations in the retinacula? And there were. There were, and I think in all of them they found alterations of some sort at the ankle. In I think 10 of them, there were alterations. Some of them were increased thickness, so reinforcement of the retinacula itself. There were gaps in continuity in the retinacula, and there were also things like adhesions to the subcutaneous tissue. So that subcutaneous tissue around the ankles, usually we can slide it a little bit. There's not a lot of fat there in most of us, and we're able to slide that skin and subcutis over that deep fascia. But when there's adhesions between the subcutis and that deeper fascia, you're not going to get the sliding there. And that adhesion is going to pull potentially on the deep fascia as well. And so that's it's just really interesting in terms of what they were actually able to observe in people who had this history of chronic ankle instability subsequent to ankle sprains. But I
love it. So you mentioned that in your article as well, that study, and it does point to the ways that maybe repeated injury is having a structural effect in a region that you're postulating, or I'm a friendly follower for sure, says there's a lot of dense innervation, there's a lot of mechanoreceptors here. Does the mechanical changes in that structure change the way that we're perceiving it, change the way the brain is interacting with it? Like you said, maybe there's more pain, nociceptive signaling. Maybe there's just a change in coordination in the way that I use it. Maybe it's a change in the body schema.
Yeah.
So then, as hands-on therapists, what do we do with our hands given that knowledge?
Yeah. And that's where like the next part of that, we can speculate more than quote, like definitively this is the thing to do. But I think both you and Whitney were talking about this in your last episode, as well as like the different things that we look for, and to like feel the textures, right? Get in there and see what you can palpate, and see if you can see how easily does the skin move, see how easily do the joints moving, and how much gliding. Do you feel a sense of stuckness that just shows up really even at the skin level? Is there adherences to the fatty layer? Like there's some of these adhesions were actually to the fatty layer that's above the fascia in those areas. So it may be quite perceivable. I did a workshop with Antonio Stecca, who did actually this, I think was involved with this study, where they did look at the chronic functional instability after ankle sprain study. And, they have a particular method that the Stecco method, is using friction and creating like kind of local inflammation to help to reorganize or stimulate the body to say, hey, this is still not prepared. Come in and take a look at it. So there would be some suggestions of that kind of treatment that would work well. I personally have worked with quite a few people that have had foot injuries or ankle injuries, and I have merely, and I do say this genuinely, I have merely traced the anatomy. That has been the focus of the treatment. I have gotten curious with my fingers, I've gotten curious with my hands and my thumbs, and I have just gently mobilized all the things without having any grand plan, just to see what I feel. And a lot of times things will show up that just strike you as not quite right. And tracing and giving all of this touch specifically to each one of the bones, each one of the ligaments, each one of the retinacula, each one of the joints, moving and palpating and just slowly walking through all of the tissues, and had the client stand up and say, the pain is 80% gone. And like, what did you do? I'm like, I touched your anatomy. I mean, it's like, I don't know. We can get really clinical about like A plus B, do this if this, and there's certainly really good, osteopathic and clinical testing for certain types of injuries and how to treat them. But I personally have a bias that if we start to really understand all the anatomy, not just the things that are the cutaway parts, right? The purest of the most understandable, isolatable structures, but feel all of it, which includes this very blobby, non-defined, sometimes almost see-through, or what is it kind of fascial system that changes its texture and tone in so many different ways, but instead are present for all of those layers in the adipose and the fat and the skin, that we somehow will be working in a very holistic way that allows the whole form to sort of fall into a better place.
I'm curious to hear kind of like I know we're still in the process of figuring a lot of this out and learning a lot about it, but I'm curious to hear sort of your maybe opinion or perspective, since you've now spoken so much about the rich innervation in these areas and how much that plays a part in proprioception and our understanding of what the body senses in that area. If you think a lot of what we do when you sort of talk about these treatment strategies of tracing the anatomy, do you think with this extensive, rich innervation in these areas that those responses that we're getting are more maybe neurologically based versus we're doing something specific to the tissue? Or do you think we're doing something more to the tissue, or maybe what mix of both? I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Can I just say all the things?
Mhm.
All the things, because I think they're not separatable, right? You have a structure, the nerves are structures. So where they're living, are they happy nerves, or are they pissed off? Are they irritated? Are they like, it's too dry in here, or it's too, my clothes are too tight, I can't move? Or, like I think in cartoons in my head a lot of the times, and I've done this like whole story about like how the nerves, if they're not getting fed and if they're not being nourished and if they can't move with ease, then they're going to get pissed off and send a signal. So clearly our perception of our bodies, like I have a client who's lost function of pretty much the left side of his body after a car accident that severed a lot of the nerves that were in his neck. And so, it's very interesting to work with him because he can't feel me in certain parts of his body. And of course, parts of his body are non-responsive to any impulse to contract. It has no muscles on those sides. The nervous system is so vitally important, and it is so much a part of how we feel ourselves, how we have awareness of what's going on with us. But they are also physical, and you can't just be. We're not just a walking brain and nerves. Like well, even that wouldn't be. We're not, maybe something even more ethereal of like electrical signals. We're not just electrical signals. We are fibers. We are fluids. We are different organizations of fibers and fluids. We are different densities of fibers and fluids and different types of tissues that are constantly informing that nervous system. And so changing one changes the other. The interdependence is completely inseparable in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's sort of how I think about it too, that are all of the nerves and the input we can put into the nervous system they're in a mechanical environment, or they're in a physical environment
yeah,
that we can put a mechanical input to.
Yeah.
And in areas like our deep fascia, I mean, there's obviously, sometimes we're trying to affect the remodeling of the collagen, but there's also this sort of liquid gel element
so important
of hyaluronan. If we want to stick with the retinacula are the most hyaluronan dense part of the fascial system. And hyaluronan is that it's a glycosaminoglycan. It's a gel lubricating, sometimes thick, sometimes more watery substance that is layered. The deep fascia of that Rachelle was talking about, these sleeves and stockings, is about 2 to 3 layers thick. And it's like baklava, like sheets of phyllo dough with thick gooey stuff in between it. And is that happening at a micro level? But these sheets of the baklava need to be able to move slightly separately from each other, whether you've got force going in a longitudinal direction or transversely. And hyaluronan responds to mechanical stress.
The bonds change. Yeah. The mechanical bonds change with touch. Yeah. And with stress. Yeah.
Right. And the more we're able, if that's one thing that we can manipulate is the viscosity of the hyaluronan in our deep fascia, that's going to inform how that deep fascia, the collagen fibers, are pulling on the nerves within that deep fascia. So I don't know, that's more the framework that I'm using.
I think when you think about that a lot, the slidey, glidey, gooey stuff is really a huge focus of my work these days, that I don't really care about how tight or toned the muscle is. I want to know how well is that muscle able to glide over the things it's supposed to glide over? How strongly is it anchored to the things it's supposed to be anchored to? And how free is the motion capacity based on these densities of hyaluronan, densities of fluids? Is there enough fluid even in there? Have they gotten glommed all together? So I'm thinking a lot more about the fluids in those parts of the body than I am the neurological contraction and response. But ironically, when you put your focus there, you start to give these really like sumptuous, kind of luscious sorts of treatments, which has a very positive neurological effect on your client, who will oftentimes go into a state of deep relaxation, and then they let go of the muscles. I'm not making them let go. I'm bringing their nervous system to a place where they can really let go and relax.
Well, this picture you're painting of a continuum, it's not either structure or neurology, is consistent with where the field is going. We're kind of post-structural, and we started really questioning all of our structural explanations for things, and our ability to actually do things like, can we actually reorganize collagen? And then we're also, I think we're moving into a post-pain science realm where we're saying, the pendulum swinging some, we're saying actually structure does do something. The actual ways that the layers glide or don't, the ways the density is there or is not, influences perhaps what the nerves are perceiving, the signals they send. And we're looking for ways to work that really encompass that whole continuum. And you've given us one there to talk about how your hands are feeling things in the tissue, and yet you're thinking about the ways that you're also influencing the brain's perception of what's going on, and you come up with this luscious experience on the client side. You're singing to the choir. Thank you very much there.
Yeah, it sounds like kind of what we're all sort of describing is this sort of amoeba response of one day it bulges out towards neurologically influenced, another day it bulges out towards hyaluronan influenced and fascial influenced and proprioceptive, another day it bulges out toward a real structural problem. It's just like what happens to be. There's always a mix of those different things, but the mix may vary or something.
Yeah, from one thing, one situation to another, one area to another, one person to another.
Is it time to tell us about your fascial plastination project?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, how many hours did you say we had for this?
Not enough.
This
is the part one.
Oh, it's so much fun. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to like chat about this stuff with you. It's so fun to think with other thinking practitioners. It's really, we kind of like to nerd out on all this stuff, but it's still so, it's so tangible, it's so accessible, and it's so real. I think that that's where our passion and drive comes from, is like to really share these stories. It's not something that's so rocket science hard to comprehend. It's like really tangible stuff. And we tend to use a lot of analogies in our teaching as well to help people just think in the really familiar spaces of, you've seen this before, you know this, you know how you would interact with, other substances like things in your kitchen. We use food analogies a lot because we know about textures and layers and how things respond. And it's really a fun thing to be able to share with people. Yeah, and so one of the biggest things that I've had the pleasure of being a part of in this topic of sharing meaningful visual information with people came in the form of the Fascial Net Plastination Project. What a ride. That was a project that started actually, I think the application process was in 2017, and it's still kind of going, but for the next 5 years of my life, I was really, really deeply involved with this project, which was a collaboration of the Fascia Research Society with Body Worlds and the headquarters of Body Worlds' actual laboratories, which is called the Plastinarium in Guben, Germany. And Robert Schleip headed up the request that this collaboration happen. And it was not a new request. For 10 years, they had been asking, can we create a full body plastinate, which is a cadaver that has been preserved through a method called plastination, where all the water in the body is replaced with plastic that is odorless. It is permanent. It holds its shape. It can be viewed outside of the dissection lab. And the artistry of the people that work on these projects and have developed this, and the woman who has spearheaded the invention of Body Worlds, is beyond measure. They are true.
So these are museum quality exhibitions showing anatomy. It came out originally as musculoskeletal anatomy. And this was a moment when, at Robert Schleip's initiation, he got that team interested in fascia. And you were part of that original Plastination Project, yes.
All the way through to its final revelation. There were 2 unveilings, one that happened during COVID in Germany on site at the Body Worlds exhibit because the Fascial Research Congress got postponed by a year. But then the big reveal at the Congress happened the following year of a single.
Whitney and I were there.
Yes, you were. It was good to see you guys there. It was a female form, and the goal was to dissect and show the fascial system. A goal that was set with lofty ideas on how that could be achieved. We all could see it in our mind. It's like a hollow body that you can see through, and you can see the sleeves and the stockings and the compartments, and you can see all of the spaces, and all the other stuff is gone, which would be great if it were a computer program where you could just click delete and all that stuff would go away. But there were so many barriers to its creation just on the physical possibility of it. How do you get inside of a closed unit and remove the items that are in it without destroying it? That was a big first question. What would give structural integrity to the entire form if everything that held it, its volume and shape, was removed? How would people understand the continuousness of fascia with the rest of the structures of the body if the other structures of the body had been removed? And then the very practical stuff is like, once you've removed things and then you're going through the plastination project, a process of embedding everything, infusing everything with plastic, what would prevent all of these new compartments devoid of their muscles from collapsing on each other, sticking together, never to be re-volumized? So the original project was cautiously accepted as a challenge accepted. Let's get going and see what we can come up with. But the original design turned out to be incredibly different from the final design in some respects. And I think once we kind of got going the right direction, what we realized was there would be a story told through windows, a story told through leaves and pages and flaps and pockets and stair steps down, leaving a lot actually of all the other structures in place in order to show how fascia connects one thing to another. Like we kind of posed the question, how do you dissect, which means separate, something that's the essence of its role is that of connection? I mean, it was just
and in many ways you were doing a reverse dissection. You were highlighting the things that usually get taken away to show these connections, as opposed to showing the muscles or the parts that
exactly
traditional dissection shows.
Yeah.
Tell us something briefly about the reveal. We want to at least spend another minute on this before we change topics, and then especially how people might be able to get a glimpse of it themselves.
Yeah. So the reveal, what do you mean? Tell about where it was shown?
What was the culmination? What did you come up with? You wanted to make this model, this 3D model. Did that happen?
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, it did. It did. And I think it happened in a really great way. And so the emphasis then became, how do we show fascia from surface to depth, from head to toe, from front to back? And so we were able to do that, showing in very specific ways, preserving the skin. For example, there's a piece of skin that is still there that runs along the back of the body in a beautiful spiral line and then goes down the leg. And then the next layer is the adipose or subcutis with the superficial fascia membrane embedded in that. And then there's a strip that parallels that shows to that depth. And then beyond that, the next strip shows to the superficial fascia membrane layer. And so this stair stepping down and then till getting to the deep fascia. And then in the antebrachial fascia and the brachial fascia and the fascia lata and the fascia cruris, these sleeves and stockings, windows were made into the deep fascia, deep diving suit, as Robert Schleip likes to call it, to show the compartments and understand how thin, even though incredibly strong, the deep fascia is. It's really thin. And in the lab, it's pearlescent and it's somewhat translucent. Once it becomes plastinated, it becomes a little bit more opaque and, of course, creates more stiffness than is there. But we were able to show that. But then even deeper structures like the mediastinum, we were able to show the view from inside of the rib cage where you can see the fascial structures continuity from the throat down to the diaphragm, and then into the brain, the meninges of the brain. And I think that what was so amazing about this, there's so much diversity within the fascial system that we were able to show samplings kind of throughout the entire form of how these exist and appear in such different ways with different jobs and different appearances, to help for maybe the first time to start to get in the mind maps that we have of the human body, to put the connective, like you said, the stuff that's removed, to put that connective tissue back into the story. Because most of us, when we think of anatomy, we think of a muscle chart, and all the fascia is gone and the muscles have been bubbled out. Like the ones at the bottom of the butt is so funny to me. Like the gluteus maximus does not have that shape of the bubble butt that's underneath. That is fat on every single human. I don't care how skinny or how much you work out. That is a fat shape, not a muscle shape. But to make our muscle charts not look weird, they actually fill in where the fat has been removed with muscle to make it look like a normal body to you. So Freya, we named her as the fascial, it's called Fascia Revealed Educating Interconnected Anatomy. It was an acronym we made for her name, just out of respect to give her a place and a reference point of, it was not her real name in life, but she is now currently living in the Berlin exhibit of Body Worlds. If you're near there or are going there, I highly recommend going to see her. They have turned an
Berlin
entire
Body Worlds, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any online imagery available? Are there places people can go and see it?
Little, actually. They're very protective of their plastinates and of their dissection approaches and those kinds of things. So there is some, when you go to the Body Worlds website, you will see 3 different views of Freya, and you can get a really good idea of her. Of the project itself, you can go to learn more about that from the Fascial Research Society's page. It's fasciaresearchsociety.org/plastination. There's some information there. And then we also have a link tree. If you look up FascialNet Plastination Project, on Linktree, there's a series of links that of all of the different, there's a mini documentary that I filmed for that. There's also a short trailer that I filmed for that. And then articles that have been written by myself for ABMP magazine, as well as for Massage and Bodywork magazine, as well as quite a few of the other participants that have written different articles about Freya in different publications. There's links to all of that. We'll put that in the show notes too. I think that would be a great resource if people want to dig in, learn a little bit more.
Awesome. We'll be sure to list those as well. So tell us how that led to the collaboration the two of you are doing. What is AnatomySCAPES? What's that like, and how does that connect to what we've been talking about?
Really directly, very directly, because after 5 years of back and forth, and 2 particular years going back and forth a lot to Germany, sometimes for a month at a time to do this dissection, I was dissecting 40 hours a week. And it was great. And it was educational beyond anything I've ever read in a book, because a lot of the things that show up, you're like, wait, this isn't even in the book. What is this? But I really got bitten by the bug of studying in the lab. And so when I came back to the US, and I wasn't going back to the lab in Guben as much, I was really hungry for another opportunity, and was introduced to the fact that we have labs here that are BioSkills labs that were open to having massage therapists that are not clinical anatomists do research and study there. And so I invited Nicole to come with me, and the rest is history. But go ahead and tell the history.
Yeah, no, and it's the project AnatomySCAPES birthed out of a moment in time as well. It was high pandemic.
Yeah.
Here in California, our massage practices were being shut down every few months, but the lab wasn't shut down.
Yeah.
And so we also had time, and to actually go into this lab that has been unbelievably supportive of us. And yeah, we just before we knew it, we had I have a team of massage therapists who work with me. We were suddenly had mini workshops happening, and we spent probably 2 years really just in the lab as much as we could, learning, exploring, and suddenly putting curriculum together from a massage therapist perspective. And so we're trying, I'd say we're trying to teach anatomy from a little bit. It's not the anatomy you want when you have to study for your boards, or if, you're taking the MBLEX or an exam, or you're trying to master the muscle charts. This is the anatomy that is about continuities, about textures. We look a lot at fat and skin, as well as the fascial system, the deeper fascial system. We definitely see muscles. We're still in love with muscles, but we're looking at where tissues glide, where they root,
relationships.
And like how can we peek beneath the surface and see how these tissues are moving under our hands, and trying to give ourselves like a better understanding of what we're touching, what we're feeling, and how some of the more superficial layers influence and mask sometimes what we think we're feeling underneath.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The cushions, we call them like removing the cushions to be able to feel things in isolation, and then you put the cushions back on, and now suddenly you can feel it better. So your palpatory skills kind of go through the roof, and your mind map gets so much stronger. And you
This is an online resource where people can go see your dissections, and with all these qualities you've been describing. Am I on the right track?
In person. We do in-person workshops.
In person. Thank you.
It's all in person because we're emphasizing so much the palpatory aspect of it. Now, we do have online courses, and our online courses include a lot of like kind of the things that we're talking about today, as well as a great amount of imagery and some shorter video clips to help to demonstrate what we're talking about, whatever the focus is for that class. But as far as the really elaborative dissection, you have to come into the space with us, because that's really where the heart of it is. At the same token, we spend a lot of time in the lab as well as in the classroom. I've been to dissection courses that spend most of the time in the dissection lab, which is great. They're very expensive. You want to make the most of every minute. But sometimes I've had a hard time, like, where do I put this information? I just saw stuff that I don't know. I don't recognize it. It's so different. What's allowing it to be where it is, and what's its role and job? So we've taken a lot of time to put together a lot of really beautiful written materials. They are beautiful. They are beautiful. They're really colorful. They're kind of read like magazines instead of course handbooks, right? And then also we do, we're both kind of crafters, and we like to like touch things and see things in 3D. So we're pulling out magnets and yarn, and we're always making things in the classroom space as well to help really solidify your understanding of what it is that you're seeing in the lab.
Yeah, we delve a lot into the science. We think that, we know science is not that accessible to a lot of the population. And it tends to be true for a lot of massage therapists, not everyone. And not everyone wants to know the science, and not everyone needs to know the science, but a lot of us do.
It can be heavy though, it's hard to read.
Yeah. And so we spend a lot of time delving into the science and trying to do it in a way that makes it really accessible. So we'll geek out on hyaluronan, but we also talk about hyaluronan and water having a love story. And we talk about, and we use some 3D models to talk about that relationship between hyaluronan and water in a way that's, and how it's influenced by mechanical touch and heat, and to really try and get that concept in a really deeper way for people. So it doesn't just
doesn't roll back out of your brain. It's like it's in your body. You understand it. You know it. You've had fun with it.
The dissection lab is overwhelming enough. We don't need to like flood people with really complex concepts. We want it to be really understandable,
but keep it high level. Yeah, it's kind of the both. How can we be the interpreters of this information to bring it to the practical space where you work and live?
Yeah, it seems a challenge a lot, because so many people in our field of massage and manual therapy kind of viewed anatomy as something you had to get through in school. And I think once they leave, a lot of people just kind of feel like that piece is behind them. So it seems like you're really doing some interesting things here to try to inspire people and get the energy and enthusiasm about, like, this is a whole different way to look at why this stuff is really relevant and important there. So it sounds like you've got some challenges to kind of reframe some of the mindsets around the value of learning anatomy stuff, and going back and maybe like relearning and looking at it from a completely different lens now.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you for the recognizing the challenge, but also that we're trying to do that in a way, hopefully, that people do get excited about. And I would say that I've heard from a lot of massage therapists that will say, I don't know anything about anatomy. My anatomy, what training was too fast, too short. And now I'm like facing these bodies with these problems and I don't even know what I'm touching here. Like, I don't know. And they are actually of their own accord recognizing that they probably didn't pay enough attention. Because like you said, initially you're like, yeah, I kind of, or maybe it's exciting to them, but it's a lot. It's a lot, you know, to know. We're still constantly revisiting muscles we thought we knew and then going like, oh, or tissues we thought we understood. And I can reread the same thing over and over again. And I can definitely, every single time I go into the dissection lab, I always learn something new, always. Because not only is it endless as far as the depth with which you can understand something, the viewpoint with which you can view something, but it also has to do with the fact that every single person is different. On your massage table, and after death, like the cadaver donors are people that had real lives with real experiences, with real exercise programs or not, and health issues or not. And so every single one of them comes in just as uniquely as your patients who come through the door. And so you're going to learn something from them. We actually always say that, and this is not an uncommon thing to say, but the donors are the professors. We are the guides. We are there to guide you through their story, to learn about what's going on here, to help you see things that you will find consistently in yourself and in other people, but also things that are unique to this person's story and to how the record that they left in their tissues is a lot of times how Gil Headley will reference it. It's such a profound way to learn. We're trying to also make it accessible, affordable, not having to commit huge amounts of time. We're doing shorter workshops, partly on purpose, so that it's a less expensive investment, so that you can get the benefit of it, but still taking our time to introduce people to the space slowly enough that it's also not a jarring experience, but one that they can go away with and be saturated, but not oversaturated.
These are your live events. We'll be sure to link to those on our site. So I want to thank you for joining us today. Briefly, what would you like people to know about connecting with you on our way out here? What would you like them to know about how they can get in touch with you and what they should, if they go to your beautiful site, by the way, what should they click on first? How can they find out what you're up to?
Well, if you're interested in studying with us, click on the workshops tab first and look for the Matrix class, because we've got one that's coming up in October. So there's still time to plan.
4 spots left.
I think there's 4 spaces left. It's getting to be full. So that would be the very first thing to do. But then actually before you don't even have to click. You're going to get a pop-up window that's actually going to give you free access to our art gallery, which is a series of images that we've taken from the dissection lab. And then we've done, what do you want to describe what do we do with those?
Oh, yeah, we do a lot of photography in the dissection lab, and we want to make it really accessible and beautiful. We're not, this is cadaver forms, and that could be really
a lot.
It can be a lot to look at. And so we do a lot of really zoomed in, looking at fiber direction. And then we enhance the photos a little bit. We pixie dust them.
We call it digital pixie dust. It's an in-house term.
And making them more of an art piece than a harsh anatomical photograph. But it's really our way of just what really inspires us at the beauty of the human form in these images. But we have I think, is it the Deep Fascia collection that's up right now?
I think so. And it just pops right up. You just give us your email and agree to not share the images or something along those lines. And that will be your first thing to do. And if you're not captivated by that, then I don't know what to say, because it's so, the textures, the patterns, the organization, the tissue of the human body is more beautiful than any like botanical gardens you've ever walked through in your life. It's as shocking as how diverse it is.
And you have some beautiful art, you have your live events, and you have some online courses.
Yes,
I recommend people go check that out. We'll link to all that. I want to thank you both for joining us today.
Also, sorry, I was going to say the other links that we would say, we'll put them all in there, but you can find us on Facebook for sure, AnatomySCAPES, and also on Instagram. We're working on getting those things going. And then, of course, we have some podcasts that are going with ABNP right now, as well as our every issue. There's a column that's with free access you can get by going to the ABNP website. So there's more stuff in the hopper. We've got more things coming your way, but we'd love to connect. And
Awesome.
And also, we have membership portal through Patreon as well. So if you find AnatomySCAPES through Patreon, you'll get weekly content from us, and it's good content, videos as well as images, as well as columns, as well as articles,
including some dissection videos
and some dissection videos as well.
A lot of people don't realize that, yeah, ABNP articles you can access even if you're not a member. You just got to go to their site. So I want to really recommend that. Whitney, are we ready for our closing sponsor?
Yes, indeed. So again, just thank you all both for a fascinating discussion here. So we really appreciate your taking some time out to join us here today. So, and also keep in mind, Books of Discovery has been a part of the massage therapy and bodywork world for over 25 years. Nearly 3,000 schools around the globe teach with their textbooks, e-textbooks, and digital resources. Books of Discovery likes to say learning adventures start here, and they find that same spirit here on the Thinking Practitioner podcast and are proud to support our work, knowing that we share the mission to bring the massage and bodywork community thought-provoking and enlivening content that advances our profession.
Instructors of manual therapy education programs can request complimentary copies of Books of Discovery's textbooks for review for use in their programs. Please reach out at booksofdiscovery.com, and listeners like you can explore the collection of learning resources for anatomy, pathology, kinesiology, physiology, ethics, and business mastery at the same website, booksofdiscovery.com, where you, as the Thinking Practitioner listener, can save 15% by entering Thinking at checkout.
And we would like to say, of course, a thank you to all of you, the listeners, and to our sponsors, where you can stop by our sites for video, show notes, transcripts, and any extras. You can find that over on my site at academyofclinicalmassage.com. And Til, where can they find that with you?
My site, advanced-trainings.com. If you have comments, questions, things you want to hear about, we love to hear from you. Thank you for the messages. If we do get, just record a short voice memo on your phone and email it to us, or send us an email, or find us on social media. But if you want to email us, it's at info@thethinkingpractitioner.com. Social media, you can find us under our names. My name is Til Luca. Whitney, what is yours?
Today, my name is Whitney Lowe. You can find me on their social media as well. And if you would, please take some time, just a brief moment, to rate us on Apple Podcasts. It really does help other people find the show. And you can hear us wherever you listen to your podcast. Lots of different apps there. So please do share the word. Tell a friend. Thank you again both for joining us today, and we'll talk to you in the next time.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, you guys.